Hey guys, so I wanted to create a villain's wish list for the Batman sequel because I've seen many people talk about it, and I want to get my perspective on where I think this trilogy should go, which is more into the fantastical nature of Gotham, while still keeping things grounded, obviously. This list is specifically thinking about the immediate sequel to the Batman, and I've separated it into two parts. One contains my realistic picks, as in I think they are likely for this world, not necessarily that they're like realistic in nature. And the other is my fanciful picks, meaning I'm not expecting them to show up, but if they did, I'd freak out. In a recent interview with Collider, Matt Reeve said that he would be interested in portraying a grounded reality for many of Batman's fantastical villains, specifically like Mr. Freeze. And with this in mind, I feel like Mr. Freeze is probably a realistic pick for this film, which many of you may have heard, and with that reality, his inclusion has an effect on who I think should show up as well. Color scheme is very, very important to me, and I absolutely adored the color scheme and subjective visuals of the Batman, and so I feel like the sequel will be similar in a sense. With Mr. Freeze, I inevitably think blue, obviously. Specifically a blue and goldish orange color scheme would be great, sort of like Arkham Origins' Cold Cold Heart, and so there it presents a look for a film that a villain needs to match. Another influence is my hope that these films will include villains that we either have not seen on screen yet or have not been done justice yet. There are so many villains in the Batman mythos, and I don't just want to see a retelling of the Nolan trilogy. You know, if Joker shows up, I'd like him to be a side character and not necessarily a threat to Batman, but more of an info broker, someone just Batman has to see sometimes due to their unexplainable connection. As much as I love Joker, we only have so many films here, and I'd rather have Matt Reeves take the time to show great villains that deserve the spotlight, or like meh villains or like bad villains that deserve redemption within a new interpretation. I hope Matt Reeves isn't too afraid of the wacky, fantastical elements of the Batman world, because I love grounding these characters, but if they are too realistic, they lose their charm. I don't want this to be anything like Nolan's hyper-real interpretation, so hope the balance is struck. With that said, I'd absolutely love to see Two-Face done again, but I think Harvey Dent fits with the second film, and his reincarnation fits the third film. I'm still annoyed that we never saw Billy D. Williams' version of Two-Face. I was very unimpressed by Tommy Lee Jones' version, as I don't think it did the complexity of the tragedy of the character justice. It just sort of mocked it and made it a joke. While the Dark Knight's version of Two-Face was probably the best one, it was very short-lived. Furthermore, many people want the Court of Owls, and I would love to see them as long as they are unique, with a unique twist I won't expect after reading the comic. Especially the second half of the comic feels very similar to what happens in the Batman, so I feel like you just can't do that. You can't retell that story. I sort of just want the court to be like a background threat throughout the films, and they sort of show up in the last one, but they're never like a villain per se. You know, they're like this corrupting force in the background. You know, they are Gotham City, and that's what I want them to be. So obviously I want Mr. Freeze. You're going to realize that aesthetics are super important to me, especially for someone like this. Hot take, I really don't care for the super high-tech futuristic versions of Mr. Freeze like in Batman Arkham City. I love that Freeze, his fight, and his characterization, but I hope we see something more like the Arkham Asylum character bio or the animated series, but like very grounded. I feel like going straight for the futurism is an obvious answer and a lazy one in my opinion. It's not really unique, especially in a blockbuster world of CGI where we have these very generic like armor suits or whatever. Give Freeze like a practical suit. For story implications, I really trust Matt Reeves on whatever he does with them, because I feel like the story, Matt Reeves can't fuck up the story. He can't fuck up Mr. Freeze. It's not a super complex story, and I hope it's different to, you know, like the animated series, like the origin we all know. I hope it's a little bit different so that there's some surprise there. But I have no doubt in my mind he would be able to write this character amazingly. It's just the aesthetic that I think I have a worry for, and I hope he really strikes that balance. Now, I wasn't a huge comic reader as a kid, so the Batman Arkham games were my like primary introduction to the Rogues Gallery. Arkham Origins was my most anticipated game when it came out, and I was a beyond excited, and I love that game to this day. I remember the trailers for the game perfectly introduced Black Mask, this extremely angry, brutal person who had an aura of intimidation. He loved torturing people. He was this scary villain. Unfortunately, the game didn't turn out to be this way at all, and Black Mask was barely in it due to a very controversial twist that I think is probably the weakest aspect of the game. Black Mask is already such a grounded character, and I feel like he would perfectly match Reeves' world. I want this guy to be tortured by his past, with a never-ending rage like Batman had in this first film. I think if Matt Reeves ripped Black Mask from the trailers of Arkham Origins, it would be absolutely perfect. But of course, there isn't just one way to do it. I think his, aesthetic, there's so much you could do with it. Hush is not a character I'm super familiar with. He's very similar to Black Mask in a sense that they both hated their rich parents and were emotionally abused. They find themselves in connection with Bruce Wayne, who seemingly made it out of a horrific childhood, yet they didn't. I've seen people cover the Hush book, and I've seen the terrible animated rendition of it. While I don't really enjoy the narrative of the book, there's great ideas there. It's very all over the place with so many characters like Superman, Catwoman, Joker, Poison Ivy. I don't really like the art style at all, and the main drawing point is the twist itself. But I look at Hush's incredible design and the passion in his eyes and that cover of the book, and I just know there's a masterpiece of an interpretation of this character just waiting. A reimagining that will put him up in an A-list villain tier. This is another character that easily fits into the grounded aesthetic of this new universe, and I think if he was reimagined into something that was just great instead of just good, I think that would be perfect here. And I think he just really matches this world, and he would be a very physical foe for Batman. While in this first film, he wasn't tested physically by a villain in this first film, and I think that's what needs to happen in this next film. I have always loved Anarchy ever since Arkham Origins, and then I checked out his first appearance. This guy doesn't have a revolutionary motivation. He's Anarchy, fed up with Gotham's corruption. If this guy were in this universe, he would need to be reimagined, as his core motivation is not much different to Riddler in this Matt Reeves universe. In the Arkham Origins side mission, he basically does what Riddler does. He attempts to destroy corrupt people and then believes Batman will take his side, and when he doesn't, he becomes angry. Anarchy is a young man who is blinded by anger. His motivation is pure, but his methods are deeply wrong. Like Hush, I see this character who has such an amazing aesthetic, and he should not go to waste. This guy would be an amazing character in a narrative sense, like a psychological study. This is a guy whose mental condition has convinced him that this doll, Scarface, is alive and forcing him to carry out criminal actions. Sometimes his actual intentions are vague. Is this doll possessed? Is the ventriloquist faking his condition or taking advantage of it? I definitely don't see this one as a main antagonist, but he would be an incredible side character. I love this character, yet he's never shown up in live action beyond the Gotham show, where he's reimagined in a way I didn't really like that much. I'm not sure how far Matt Reeves could take his character. To me, even in a grounded world, I love an ambiguous supernatural element. Stuff that makes you question whether what you saw is real or an illusion. Mad Hatter could be the obsessed Alice in Wonderland maniac who sees reality we don't, forcing people to wear rabbit masks for his sick fantasies, or he could be somewhat supernatural in addition, putting Bruce in a trance and transporting him to his realm. Either way, the look of this character and the environments he inhabits is extremely vital. The Arkham games have shown 3 times how to ground this character in a gritty and dark world. Yes, we had a Scarecrow in the Dark Knight trilogy, but he was severely disappointing to me. I need a Scarecrow with a massive scythe, the large pointy hat, and the needles for fingers. I think the hallucinations of Batman Begins were so limited by the realistic style, they weren't really scary at all. I would love to see Scarecrow be a genuinely horrific person who you barely get to see clearly. I want Batman to go into a nightmare sequence straight out of a horror film. This sort of expressionistic take on Scarecrow would match the subjective philosophy of how they shot the Batman, where the audience is supposed to feel like they are in the head of its characters. Alright, now we're into my fanciful picks, meaning I don't think these people, well, maybe 2 of them might show up, but this first one definitely, if this guy shows up, it will be over. It will be my favorite movie ever, just immediately. But my first pick, we're gonna go strong, it's Killer Moth. If you've been following my channel or know me personally, I never shut up about this guy. I love Killer Moth, or at least the potential of him that I feel has gone wasted. His original origin story of being like an anti-Batman with like a moth mobile and a moth cave was really stupid, obviously. The Drury Walker version is much better, but this villain has always been a joke, and nothing really more than that. I seriously believe there could be a grounded interpretation of this character. The joke aspect of him could even be incorporated. This guy could be scary. I mean, take inspiration from the Mothman legend. Maybe he's always been seen as a joke, and now he just embraces the idea, but when you get to fight him, he's anything but a joke. Batman Arkham Asylum, I think, has the best aesthetic for him that is still comic booky, but also grounded at the same time. Obviously, if Matt Reeves were to use this guy, he would need to be even more grounded than that, but there has to be a balance there, because the wackiness of this character is like his defining feature. If you make him too realistic, then you get like a new 52 shitty version of him that might as well be a completely different person. Realism and groundedness are not the same thing. A grounded, believable, relatable, and intimidating Killer Moth interpretation is absolutely possible. Anything can be done terribly, and anything can be done amazingly. So I guess this one is a bit more likely, but I put it in fanciful because it's definitely supernatural, and that's Poison Ivy. I mean, she can control plants, which is not very realistic at all. It can definitely be grounded. She's not a very deep, compelling character, like in a narrative sense, usually, and that's why I think there's a great opportunity for that here. I would die for like a rich, intoxicating aesthetic of Arkham Asylum's botanical gardens in a movie. The set design possibilities for such a character is literally endless, and nonetheless, a heavy green and red color palette might interfere with the blue palette of Mr. Freeze. This could be solved in many ways, and I definitely don't think it would be impossible that to have both of these villains in the same movie and have the aesthetic feel cohesive. It's a more complex problem that I think Matt Reeves and crew could definitely solve. So the next pick is Killer Croc. Not only is Killer Croc just a horrific villain with narrative potential as a circus freak with an incurable condition, but the Gotham sewers would be an incredible location that we don't really see much in the movies. We saw it in The Dark Knight Rises, but it was just some concrete. Like, I want that green, disgusting brick. I can easily see this villain being a horror section of the film, maybe in connection with Scarecrow. That would be extremely nostalgic for me also, because when I was a kid, the Killer Croc boss in Arkham Asylum scared the shit out of me. I dreaded doing it, but I loved it at the same time. Now the next character I extremely like, this might even be, maybe if like Clayface is more of a known character than Killer Moth, but Clayface is definitely more of a fantastical villain. I would love to see the dramatic origin of Clayface as a passionate actor who is blessed and cursed by the ability to play any role imaginable. Obviously, this is a really fantastical villain. I still don't really understand how exactly his biology even works, but I mean, like, Spider-Man 3 had Sandman, so I guess it could work. Clayface is such a classic comic book villain, and if he showed up in a film, that would be insane. Like, I really don't think we'll see him, but it would be crazy. I remember being like blown away by Solomon Grundy and Clayface in Arkham City, that these super fantastical characters were somehow perfectly incorporated in this grounded world. This next pick and this last pick is a very unknown character. Not a lot of people know about him, and he's definitely more realistic. Like, I think he could easily fit into Matt Reeves' world, but I'm doubting Matt Reeves even knows about this guy or who he is, and that would be the Great White Shark, not the other shark character. I forgot his name. King Shark, not that guy. I really don't like King Shark, I'm sorry. He was good in the Suicide Squad movie, but I'm talking about the Great White Shark. This guy isn't like the best character ever. That's probably why he's not, an A-list villain. That's sort of a theme with these lesser known people, because they haven't been done perfectly yet. People don't realize their potential. Warren White was thrown into Arkham Asylum after pleading insanity, thinking this would get him a lesser sentence. Instead, this put him in a horrific environment where he was tortured by Gotham's criminally insane. This physical abuse damaged his appearance permanently, his mind deteriorated with it, until he became insane like the rest of them. He embraced his new appearance and sharpened his teeth to make it even more exaggerated. Imagine this guy got out of Arkham Asylum and what he would do. And I just look at the character bio of Arkham Asylum and that cool looking suit and stuff, and I just think, like, this guy has potential. This guy looks cool. He has a cool backstory that I think would fit in Matt Reeve's world since he set up Arkham Asylum, and I think it would just work. But obviously, this is such an unknown person that I don't even think Matt Reeves even knows about him or would consider him. But I think that's what this trilogy needs to do, is it needs to focus on those people the mainstream doesn't even know about or never heard of before. Obviously, there's tons of more villains out there like Firefly, Bane, Ratcatcher, Hugo Strange, Calendar Man, etc., etc. But these are my biggest picks specifically within the context of an immediate sequel. Thinking about which villains have shown up in the past. Even though I like Joker, I don't want him to be a main villain again. These are characters I think should play a big role in the film besides Easter eggs and small cameos. So yeah, that's my list. You know, I could even go into more stuff. I was tempted to put Prometheus in here, but he's a character that's done so badly. He also has, like, his suit looks cool in the Arkham Asylum character bio. Other renditions of his suit look really, really bad. And he's a character whose origin story has so much potential, and he kind of looks cool in that bio, but he's not a good character. I'm gonna be real, he's not a good character, but he has, like, so much potential, and I feel like there's so many characters that can be taken that are bad and can be done and reimagined in a way that makes them really, really good. But I feel like Prometheus is way out there. There's also stuff like Maxi Zeus, but I didn't want to make this villain list, like, absolutely massive. So tell me what you guys think of, like, this list, and what villains would you like to see in this next Batman movie, and what villains would you like to see in the third one as well. And I will see you guys in the next video.